Okay, hi everybody, welcome. My name is Patti Napolitano. I'm a social worker and professor with Cleveland State University, and this is the Factory of Gladness podcast. And today we have a very special guest who, if you've been following, I've been manifesting this man to have time to meet with me for the entire college semester. Senator Thomas F. Patton the first, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for taking some time to meet with me. You have been in the Northeast Ohio region your entire life.
Yes.
I know you're a West Tech warrior.
Mm-hmm.
One of the questions I guess I'll start out by asking you is, I supervise social workers who always want to turn a school into something, and as our state is looking at the baby boom generation shrinking and the continuing shrinkage of generations, we have all these school buildings. Can you talk about, as someone whose high school was turned into condominiums, can you talk about some of the good for the community kind of projects that the state of Ohio would consider for brownfield grants or those kinds of infrastructure projects?
Well, brownfield grants, I'm proud of the fact that if you refer to the Cuyahoga County Land Bank, in 2009 they did the Land Bank legislation, with Cuyahoga being the pilot project. We hope that, and the success of that is to be able to go in and triage neighborhoods, find out what neighborhood, by knocking a house down or two or acquiring a house or two, could improve the value of the rest of the street or neighborhood. Some are impossible. Some there's very few houses left. So that, again, like a triage, that patient's not going to make it. This patient can be wait, but we got to take care of this patient right away, kind of. And I'm delighted to say we had hoped that if that was successful in Cuyahoga County, vis-a-vis brownfield, and things of that line, that we would get maybe 8 or 10 of the large counties to do it. But as of I think it was January of last year, Summit County became the 70th county. So we have 70 of the 88 counties. The governor had $400 million in brownfield investment money, and instead of giving it to the county commissioners to decide where it went to the land banks, because these are people who, it's not a for-profit organization. They really want to try to get in there. They're acquiring land, acquiring properties, and then if there's a business, there's a great restaurant in Lakewood called Summer House. It used to be the Silver Quill, and it was very kind of a dark, but right next to Pier W with Sobeys on the lake. Well, they literally gave the restaurant to the owner.
Yeah.
Well, then he put in like $3 million, and now it's a beautiful restaurant.
Yeah.
And it's just an example of one of the things brownfields can do. But, as far as school buildings and, you think about any school building out there, they got to be filled. Old buildings have to be filled with asbestos. When I first got to Columbus, we were spending on average $3 million a day on new school construction, mostly in the rural areas. We were using the tobacco settlement money, and people say, well, how did you guys get the tobacco settlement money so much money? Because we pay so much money in Medicaid, for the lung cancer, the smoking victims, if they've got emphysema or whatever. And that was just a cause of, you guys sold cigarettes, you made our people sick, so now you've got to help. But we were able to turn that money in, I think, into a good area. But there's always, like you said, my high school is now a condo complex. St. Coleman School is now part of Edna House, which is a drug and alcohol treatment center for women at the old convent for St. Coleman's and the old school building. So there's very few of my buildings that still exist, except Cleveland State's still around. So it's nice to drive by there, see it's still standing. Otherwise, there's no evidence I was here. But I think that there's a challenging time now when it comes to education, because, as you said, school buildings and enrollments grow, and then they shrink, and then potentially they grow again, or not. And yet they still have budgets in mind, for expecting the large group of kids. And I think some members of the legislature want to direct funding towards the amount of kids as compared to the amount of kids that they once had, and they still expect to get the same amount of money. And I'm all about public school education, but also about school choice. And I think that when you look at the state's rainy day fund, we have $3.8 billion in our rainy day fund, and hopefully we won't have to use it in my lifetime. But The school districts throughout the state of Ohio have $10.5 billion in carryover funding. There's one school out there at least that has over $100 million in quote unquote reserves. I think every school should have some reserves. I think they should have at least 50% of the next year's budget in reserves. I think if they have plans for other buildings, I think they should be able to set aside money and grow that money till they're ready to build the new gym or the new building. But as we see now, though, the outcry of the people over their property taxes, which is really a significant issue, underlying that significant. I've done 3 times. This is my 3rd time. I've tried to do a property tax freeze for seniors over 65 making less than $70,000. I tried it under 50, didn't fly. But, my senior citizens that once they're 65 on a fixed income, then they're forced to move out of the house because they might live in a neighborhood that's suddenly skyrocketing or the values have been raised,
Sure.
without really cause or, reasoning. And so now they're forced to move to a smaller home or an apartment or a senior living center. The Cleveland Clinic in 2004 did a study that showed that when a couple is forced to move, an elderly couple forced to move, within 6 months, at least one of the 2 will have a serious medical incident, heart attack, stroke, because of the anxiety. They're no longer going to the same church. The woman's not playing pinochle with her girlfriends in the neighborhood. He's not going down to the local bar or VFW to have a beer with his guys. And now they're in a different neighborhood. And so you can see how much stress and strain that could put on it.
So what is the role of the state in helping to encourage a healthy community where citizens are thriving, where citizens feel ownership, they have enough sustainable income to participate in the community? When we talk about housing, I have spent 25 years of my career in housing as a social worker, and we know that the algorithm-driven rents are driving these high housing prices that are ballooning areas like the St. Coleman's neighborhood and St. Pat's on Bridge, where there are people who moved there in the 1960s and 1970s as Catholic workers living in poverty, who have paid off homes that cannot afford their property taxes because of rents rising.
Well, this is what I said has led me. This is the 3rd time I've tried to introduce the bill to freeze there. It's just because some folks in New House City or neighborhoods, Tremont, will buy a house and put in all glass ceilings and windows and add additions to the house. Now their house is worth $350,000, $400,000. The guy that bought the house next door for $45,000 in 1960, been retired for 8 years. Now they're telling him his house is worth $300,000, and he's $1,700 a month Social Security.
Right.
How is he so? At minimum, when I've introduced these bills, I said freeze their taxes. Doesn't matter what else happens in the neighborhood. But when they sell that house, the new buyer would inherit what would have been their increased taxes. They don't get the same quote unquote deal. But my county auditors association will come back and say it's too complicated, it's too hard to figure out. To which my current response is this: we have a rover currently today, as we're speaking, up on Mars, driving around Mars, picking up soil samples, and send the results of the said soil samples back to the planet Earth. So you tell me what's complicated for the auditors that they can't figure this out. They have to do the homestead exemption application. They'll do the freeze the tax application. And I think this is the one thing that we absolutely have to do. This is the greatest generation.
So who is opposing this?
County auditors.
County auditors
association. Yep.
And
they're saying
what
it's
is
too
in
hard
it for them?
They just say it's too hard to figure out. They think it's too much work. They can't do it.
Because
But
what do they
this
lose?
is the same county auditors association here in Cuyahoga County. Cuyahoga County, the state of Ohio pays at least 10% of everybody's property tax. That's hidden in there, whether it's a commercial building, a residential building, apartment building. And so the auditors, before they can issue new property taxes every 6 years when they reevaluate the property, they have to contact the state first and run the numbers by them. Because the auditor might say, whoa, that's a pretty big increase there. Why don't we think that's too high? But this year, the county didn't do it, as a past year rather, because they said they ran out of time and didn't have time to give it to the state. Well, they have 6 years. We know when Christmas Day is going to be. We can't say, oh my God, we didn't know it was going to. No, we know to plot and plan before Christmas. You better get the gifts you got to get. 10 grandchildren, I know what I got to do. but the auditors didn't. And then you see these outlandish property tax values. And when the people complain randomly that we'll give that guy 20% credit, he's all right. And neighbors next door are not, they're comparing notes. The guy said, you got a finished basement, you put a new roof on, my basement's flooded, you got 20% off, I got nothing. I mean, the county has no rhyme or reason into how they do this evaluation. And I think that, these are the kind of things that there's a levy going, or excuse me, a signature process going on now to try to put property taxes on the ballot, to eliminate property taxes. And I can't imagine if that gets on the ballot, who's not going to vote for that? Everybody will. But that blows a $19 billion hole in our budget. And so how do you advise people? Because I agree with the people, their property taxes are too high.
So the Senate is currently not in session because of a budgetary issue?
No, we're in session. This week we're not having an official session, but we still have the Finance Committee, and we're going through, we're going through reach for it whenever we'll split it. Anyway, the Senate's in session said that we didn't schedule any committees or session this week because we have well over 1,000 amendments we're trying to consider for our version of the budget. As you know, the governor introduces his version, then the House does their version, and then finally the Senate does their version. When the House and Senate will do competing versions, then they'll come back together and they'll have what's called a conference committee. They'll go over 300 or 400 differences. The first 250 are good. They'll probably fight over the last 70, and then the governor, who can't add anything more to the budget, but he does have the pen. He can line item veto anything that we put in. He doesn't like it. And so it's a 2-year budget. We'll be done by June. We have to have it done by June 30th. And there'll be lots of interesting things in the budget. Hopefully there's some property tax relief. There's going to be some other tax things, I'm sure, in there as far as tax cuts. But I'm just struggling with that because right now, when I took office, I had 9 income tax brackets, okay, and started at 9.25 all the way down. And so we now have 3 brackets. We have 3.25, 2.75 for the majority of Ohioans, and then finally we have a 0% tax for people making under $26,000 a year. They don't pay, nor should we. And so there's some people that would like to see us go to just 2.75, but the wealthy people that pay the 3.25, they're not calling my office saying, I need a tax cut. And we're bringing in Intel and a couple of the major defense companies are coming to Ohio. So the 3.25 is scaring them off. And again, that's another hole of $1.6 billion we have to take from somewhere else, be it Medicaid funding or school funding or, I always say there's a million ways to spend $1 in Ohio, so it's just, it's always going to be a challenge, but what you want to do, to your question, is you want to try to make it affordable and easy. The quality of life is what you're looking for. You're looking for families getting more bang for their buck, and the nice thing about property taxes, about any kind of a tax decrease, is that the money in their pocket is much better spent than the money in the state or city or federal government coffers. If you have the money, we'll spend it. If they have the money, let them spend it the way they want to spend it.
Now, you are either, according to some people, a villain stealing from the bellies of poor villages everywhere with these camera tickets, or a hero for Ohioans everywhere.
Well,
you've been fighting the good fight pretty loudly against unmanned camera tickets in this state.
Yeah, and I will continue. I think that what a farce it is that somebody's going to get a ticket 30 days later in the mail, and that's going to correct their bad driving. when they're speeding or they're drinking while they're driving, that is a threat to everybody. So we need to pull those people over, and if they're impaired, we need to get them off the car before they do some serious damage. But instead, these tickets that come 30 days later, I always use the expression or like the comparison. I had an elderly couple that lived in Berea, and they called me Mr. Patton. You know, my husband and I, we saved our money for several months. We had enough money to take our grandkids to Kitty Park, which is in Brooklyn. But to get to Kitty Park, they have to get off at Bel Air and drive through Lindale. And she called, she goes, we had such a wonderful day, took some pictures. We had enough money to buy them ice cream cones. It was the most wonderful day. It was a month ago today. I just opened up the mail. We have 2 tickets going through, back and forth, $175 each. And she goes, what do I buy this month? My food or my medicine? Or do I cut my medicine pills in half and share with my husband? Is that appropriate for a town of 119 people? Lindale has 119 people, and they're at millions of dollars worth of tickets a year. So is that fair? I mean, who are they keeping safe on that little stretch? I'm a big law enforcement advocate. Obviously, I come from a long history of family and police in my family, and I've been given awards by the only 2-time Legislative of the Year award. They made me an honorary lifetime member of the FOP. So I'm pro-police, and I want all the traffic laws enforced. But to enforce them with the camera, that money is all going out of state. The ticket companies, not a single ticket company in Ohio. The biggest one is in Australia. Second big one is in England. Sweden's got a big one. The rest of them may be out in Arizona or so on. So 40% of the tens of millions of dollars that are written in tickets are leaving the state, and in many cases leaving the country. So I believe put policemen on the highway. If people are like me, I drive down 71. If I see a policeman ahead, I quickly look down to and make sure I'm going the right speed limit. It's a good reminder, good wake up call in case you're, absentmindedly going a little too fast. So will always fight the idea behind the speed cameras, because everybody that I've talked to, both in law enforcement and in other areas, they always believe that they're just cash cows, for these local governments. And one mayor who was making $24,000 a year put in speed cameras and increased his salary to $88,000 a year.
Oh, wow.
I mean, that's documented. You can prove that.
Must have been from the increase in hours that he was spending monitoring it.
Or counting his money, that he may have been doing. But, speed cameras it's not something you want to be known for because there's lots of things that the film tax credit is a bill I first did in 2009. We've done 88 movies in Ohio since we've done that. We did it first, with the $25 and $50 million worth of tax incentives. Cleveland State did a study, found out that for every dollar in tax credit, we got $3.19 in revenue, counting the hotel taxes, the restaurant taxes, the payroll taxes of the people, to the point where Cleveland State then opened up a film school to teach the different crafts. We had 288 students in their freshman class when they opened up. Ohio State now has opened up a film school. So we have a city or state of New York with a $400 million tax credit. Pennsylvania's already got $100 million. We have Kentucky with 75, trying to get to 100. The House has agreed to 75. I'd like to see it be 100. I've always wanted to grow it slower, though, because you want to make sure that for every dollar you get back, you're at least making some money, getting a better return on it. And so far, we're doing really well, 3-to-1 ratio. And people in Ohio like seeing movies made here. This new Superman movie coming out, you visibly see the arcade, you see Cleveland City Hall, you see parts of the city that you live in are now being viewed all around the world.
And we have a really well-respected film school.
It's a marvelous school, and I think that young people looking for a job, this one of the things I'm always trying to impress on students. If you're not a really good high school student, and some kids aren't, some kids will struggle in school, but their parents think they're a failure if they don't go to college. They themselves as failures, so the press is to go to college. And after a year when it doesn't work out, they come home with about $40,000 in debt zero skills. We need to identify these kids in ninth grade, and find out, all right, maybe not so good in reading and math and things like that, but this young man or young woman, they could take a coop apart, put it back together, and they're great with their hands. So let's find a trade for them to do. And that trade, while they're working as an apprentice, they're getting paid a decent amount of money, but it also counts as a 2-year associate degree. And then when they're finally a journeyman, in many cases, making over $100,000 a year. You know what their school tuition college fund is that they owe? Zero.
So what needs to happen in the state of Ohio to bring more trades into the high school process?
We are
because
working
my
on that
kids
now.
are told college credit plus, go to your community college and your high school. They're not even on campus anymore.
No, I believe in all those programs. I do believe in all those College Plus and all.
Well, I'm a big fan of being on campus between classes and after school and engaged in community activities.
As compared to I think that part of the whole college experience should be the campus life.
Well, and the high school experience.
Oh, the high school.
Because we've had the college experience move into our high schools. So I know many high school students talk about the vocational tech programs that they go through. There's something about cosmetology that you can't be board certified before you graduate high school, but I know a lot of people plan to do that right out. The trades are great they're the kings of second chances. I know they do great recruiting in the probation department where I've worked before.
They're looking now. I heard a podcast from a college professor who said that with the trades for generation, the grandfather got the son, and then they got the grandson, and then he got his children. But now it seems like the last couple generations, they say, I wanted more for you than to be a plumber. I wanted more for you than to be a sheet metal worker. I want you to go to college and have, and he said, here's a warning out there, is that's why this last 15 years has been a real drop off, because the family passed the baton along isn't happening as much. So it used to be you had to know someone to get into a trade or have a hook or a connection. Now they're actively recruiting in the school levels, trying to get these young people. And I applaud them for doing that, because these are very, very, very good jobs. But the professor went on to say, with the advent of AI, he goes, all those white collar jobs are going to be at risk. Whereas those union or building trades or blue collar jobs, AI will never supplant those.
Well, and I'd like to talk about the dignity and worth and vocation of first responder jobs in police and fire, and what the drop off is of people not enrolling in those programs.
Well, shame on all those people that were, defund the police, and the police are bad. And I'll tell you something, they need to ride around one shift in the back of a police car just to see what these men and women have to do. It's the most dangerous of jobs. It's one of the jobs that is high in suicides, high in divorce, because the stress of the job is just so intense. Just a shift, just one night. And as I said, my father, my older brother, 4 of my nephews, and my only son were policemen, so I got to see firsthand the strain, the pressures of the job. And they call it the thin blue line that protects the good people from the very, very bad people. That you've got that blue line to protect us. So whenever anybody complains to me about law enforcement, about that, I said, you never needed them, did you? Yeah. Inevitably, I said, well, no. And I said, because if you ever needed them, you wouldn't be talking like. Same thing with the firemen. The fire people, not as hard to recruit. There's, firemen still have a great deal of respect.
They have a cooler car.
Well, you can say that too, but
don't tell that to a mounted police unit.
The firemen will always joke that the policemen are policemen because they weren't smart enough to pass the fire test. Of course, the firemen will say that the police will say the same about fire, but I respect both vocations, and I think it's special. It takes a very special servant, kind of thing. I want to serve. I want to be able to do a servant heart to be able to do this kind of job.
Well, I know every county in Ohio has critical time intervention officers, and those are run through our county mental health boards. And those CTI programs are evidence-based to bring officers home safely and the offenders home safely. because if you know anyone who's been working in law enforcement for any amount of time, ask them to just reach out like this. It's a very difficult job on your shoulders. And so it's very helpful to really be exposed to those soft skills if you don't have them in your FTO. But I also know that from an evidence-based perspective, the best long-term outcome for first responders is to have a co-responder who's trained as a mental health provider, who's someone like a social worker.
No, I think that these guys and ladies are asked to be both law enforcement and, to a certain extent, social workers. They get into a domestic violence situation, husband and wife are fighting. It's, what happens is that what they try to do is that I've read reports and studies on this, is they try to separate them and take the husband in the kitchen, take the wife in the living room, try to ascertain just how hurt she is, and does she feel safe? Has things calmed down, or would it be better if he spent the night with his mom or his sister? They don't want to arrest a guy. But if he decides he's going to be violent with the officers, and when they're trying to subdue him, inevitably the wife jumps on the policeman to defend the husband, even though she's the one that's being beat up. So
I've heard this story many times.
I call it the call of the wild. They're wildly in love with the guy,
humans are wildly unpredictable. But from a state perspective, when we're talking about how do we attract people to their peace officers, right? So attracting young folks, when I talk to peace officers who are recruiting, who are volunteering to be in programs like the Rangers, they say, like, my hope is that we could have a Cleveland police force that is comprised of 75% of CMSD graduates.
Well,
I would really love to see that. So how are we not doing that? Between 18 and 21, you're no longer in high school, you're an adult, but you can't carry a weapon. So you have to find some way to engage those kids for those 3 years, other than joining the military, which is not for everyone.
I agree. I don't think, I think the biggest challenge that the city of Cleveland has with their police recruiting, they've already elevated the age to 52. You can take the entrance exam at 52 years of age.
I was thinking that they just weren't old enough.
Well, I think 52 and being asked to run 19, 20, 23-year-old kids down an alley or get in a fight with a 25 or 6-year-old guy when you're 52. Some 52-year-old guys are in better shape than some young kids, but still, when I have EMS guys that are asking to be able to retire at 55, because at 55, after 30 years in EMS, they're still expected to carry the 350-pound guy down 2 flights of stairs. And they never make it to 65 before their back breaks down anyway. And so, the police issue right now is the Civilian Review Board that were voted in by the people of the city of Cleveland. And I think they should have that, but I think the requirements to be on the Civilian Review Board are these. I think, you should be able to pass a background check. Because if you've got a record, if you, are not, you can have a speeding ticket. I'm talking about a criminal record, misdemeanor felonies. Weed them out. Then make them go to the police academy, pay them to go to the police academy. They don't have to do the mile, they don't have to do the push-ups, but they have to study tactical responses, what things are done, how they're done, what should you do in a hostage situation. Find out what's up, and then once they've passed the academy and they're put on the board, twice a month they have to go through ride-arounds. Because again, they have to maintain, they have to be right now. As I understand it, the Civilian Review Board is so dysfunctional because they can't fight. They're all trying to be in charge. They all want to run it. I don't know that it's really worked. So let's put some guardrails on it, what we're looking for. And because other than that, if you're a policeman, the current Civilian Review Board, the way it's set up is that if they all agree that the officer in question didn't show enough patience or overacted in a circumstance situation, he'll be fired. They have the ability to fire. They don't give it to the mayor to fire or the police chief to fire.
Without having been trained in the job,
yes.
They are determining if this person has met the requirements, the standards of the job.
You know how much time it takes to pull a gun and pull a trigger? Between 0.8 and 1.4 seconds. to be able to pull and go boom, 1,000, boom. I mean, and so 99% of the time with that instant decision they make the right decision. But, it's tragic when they don't. It's tragic when the young kid at Cadell that pulled out the gun, very realistic looking gun, they noted the police car skid on the wet grass, after being told there was an active shooter outside of a rec center.
Yeah, the car was
the car slid 94 feet on the grass, wet grass, and the officer, first year on the job, he gets out of the car, and the kid's 5'11" and 190 pounds. It's weighed more. I know he's bigger than the policeman that shot him. Tragic, and I understand. I mean, all day long it's tragic and wrong, but kids have to know it's a lesson. And maybe it's a lesson that someone needs to teach these kids. Don't play with guns. Don't play with real guns. Don't play with, certainly not with guns that look real, because somebody else is going to think they're real. The hell, they shouldn't even sell them at the stores. I mean,
and to officers to approach more slowly. I know Ailita, the International Law Enforcement Trainers Association, would say, in any kind of training scenario where you're learning to punch and you're learning to hold the suspect, you should be training to hold that suspect in a safe, sustained position for 8 minutes. Because, boy, that is a lifetime. When your heart is racing and you've gone from containing someone to life-giving measures and life-saving measures,
well,
it's very, very fast.
Anytime a police officer is fighting with a suspect, that is literally a life or death situation, because if they lose the fight and their gun is available and their gun is exposed, that gun could be then taken and shot and killed the officer who just tried to apprehend. One of the great things we have in Northeast Ohio, Pete Elliott's Fugitive Task Force, we're having down in Clemson in a couple of weeks. Salute them. They've arrested their 60,000 violent fugitive. Think about that for a second. We're not talking arresting 60,000 misdemeanor or even felony arrest. We're talking about violent fugitives. Fugitives have proven assault, attack, perhaps in rape, but certainly with guns involved in most cases. And these guys have to go in and find him. And in the course of their 20 years, they found 60,000 of them just here in Northern Ohio. And they never get enough credit.
Are they marshals?
They're part of the U.S. Marshals, but the various local departments will loan out officers to the task force for a period of time, and they rotate on and off. I had a nephew who was one of the Cleveland liaisons.
So for a civilian review board to expect an officer, a reasonable officer, to respond with the same finesse and control of a marshal, that is a very different apprehension.
Well, no, I think the marshals are held to a similar standard. I mean, when they're apprehending, we actually introduced a bill a couple of weeks ago, anti-barricade bill, and we had because they said if they have the fugitive, let's say he's in this building, but he, at the front door, he's got a hostage and a gun, and he's saying, I'm not giving up. If he gets finally, after a day of negotiating, and the priest comes in or his mother tries to talk him out, eventually somehow or other they subdue the guy and get the arrest made, hopefully, without a problem. This guy isn't charged with anything else. There's no additional charge.
It's not a violent charge.
It's no additional charge for putting up a fight and having the barricade situation. So it's called the barricade bill. Pete Elliott, Marshall Elliott, U.S. Marshal Elliott, who's been appointed by Republican and Democratic governor.
My friend, I was the crisis intervention behavioral health specialist for Cuyahoga County Probation Department, which is 10,000 to 12,000 individuals at any given time. And I read over 1,700 violent histories for people who came in and had suicidal thoughts. And the people who are on probation in Cuyahoga County who have charges and pages and pages of charges, you can't imagine the abyss that people look into. And those are charges, right? Those aren't incidents that were not progressed to a charge. So the amount of violence and trauma that our first responders, as well as our criminal justice system, the court reporters, our judges, attorneys who have to really consider all of these things. We have a lot of trauma exposure throughout the entire system. So I feel like all the way from our police officers to our judges, there's also a reticence to pursue mental health care. So how do we destigmatize that for police the same way that we have for fire? Is there anything that we're working on the Senate floor?
Not at this time. It's just we do have a training bill that the governor's introduced, like $180 million in officers to go down to the and get retrained or get a refresher course. The governor put it in, the Senate, the House took it out. There was some discussion whether the Senate's going to put it back in, or at least even at a smaller amount. Some of the locals think we can train our own people better than send them for 2 or 3 days in Columbus, when we can use them up here and train them off hours or on their off days, what have you. So that's a discussion that, we need to have, continual training in almost every other occupation. Cosmetology, you mentioned, it could be basket weaving. There's going to be a newer, greater, better, quicker, faster way to do it. And so we should always be kept up on the latest and greatest. That goes for pipe fitters, it goes for bus drivers, it goes for police and fire. I mean, there's always better ways to do it, and I'm all about, maintaining, continuing education programs.
Well, I want to close with one final question, and I hope it's a win, and I hope it's something that's been on your mind, which is passenger train travel in the state of Ohio. I know you are you chair of our transportation committee?
Yes.
Is there anything on the horizon for passenger trains?
Well, I got assigned to this MORPH-C, which is a multi-state conglomeration of people that are going to discuss rail options. So the Senate president appointed me to it. So we haven't had any meetings since I got appointed to it. It cost the state $25,000 to join the compact, because we had not been in the compact. So my memory, though, of the 3C railroad from when the federal government offers $300 million for the train to go from Cleveland to Columbus through Dayton to Cincinnati.
The 3C, okay.
The 3C.
Gotcha.
And D, because they always said 3C because they had a stopover in Dayton. The average speed of the train was going to be 23 miles an hour.
Oh, yeah.
It shared the same lines with CSX and Norfolk Southern. Mm-hmm. They have some coal train cars that go as slow as 18 miles an hour. And so if you're behind one of those.
And they have legislation that they have the priority of the routes, Norfolk Southern.
Federal government gives them that priority. Matter of fact, any state laws that we implement, for example, in Olmsted Falls, the Senate will stop the train, just stop for sometimes hours at a time. And there's, from one side of it, now they'll say, to be fair, they'll say, we were here before Olmsted Falls built up all these houses. And that's true. Years ago, Congressman Kucinich thought that the train traffic going through Rock River and Bay was the higher density area. So we moved 88 trains a day to the area coming up from Lorraine, through North Ridgeville, through Olmsted Falls Township, Berea, Middleburg, Brook Park, all the way into the western part of Cleveland. And the residents, 3 beats at everything, there's 3 shouts of the horn. And I was able to get the very first quiet zone issued for that area, as long as they put up quad gates instead of the S gates that you could drive around. All 4 gates were closed, or they went back 300 feet with elevated concrete with these high rubber things. So again, they couldn't do the turnaround. As long as they replaced that safety issue with another one. But meanwhile, when they stop on the tracks, and safety vehicles can't get from one side of the track to the other, and you can fine them $10,000, but to a railroad that's worth hundreds of billions, that you can't force them to do anything, because federal law gives them their absolute right, and they have the license. And actually, I remember asking the guy from one of the railroad companies, CSX or Norfolk Southern, so, well, why did you agree to let the state share the rail lines with you? And his answer was this: it's kind of like when your wife asks if her mother can move in with you. He said, you have to say yes, but you don't mean it, because we don't want them on that road, but we're not going to say no. But it just, where Amtrak loses money in every city that they're in. They do. And where they're necessary, Amtrak, cities that are driving difficult and parking impossible. We're not driving difficult in Ohio. We have a wonderful interstate system. You get to any of the major cities, Cleveland, Columbus, there's plenty of places to park. Whereas Chicago is an example, used to be a sea of cabs. New York, you still see a sea of cabs.
My husband's family's from San Francisco, and his grandma would look out the window at dinner and say, "Where are the people? It's like a ghost town out there." It was creepy to them.
Yeah, but I always keep an open mind on stuff like passenger rail. But, I would, as an example, like to see our own RTA expand instead of stopping at the airport, go all the way out to Medina County. I would like to see the east side, instead of stopping at Shaker Square, go all the way out to Beechwood or Menor or something.
Would that be a state subsidized project?
It would. The state gives plenty of money to our transit, our local transit, whether it be COTA or RTA in Cleveland, and a lot of the transportation money flows through to them. We in Cuyahoga County have been subsidizing the RTA at a full 1% sales tax. When was the last time you took a bus? You probably took a bus pretty easy.
Oh, yeah.
See, I haven't taken a bus in.
My kids are CMSD grads. They ride the RTA to and from school. We love Rita.
And I had a fight with the Cleveland schools because they're putting K through 5 on yellow school buses, and Sally's 6th grader was being given a pass and asked to get on a public transit bus. And how wrong was that?
Oh, Senator Patton, my daughter rode the Rapid with me her freshman year of high school. And I love the RTA, but that's a little young, 6th grade.
But now when you give 9, 10, 11 to 12-year-olds an all-day bus pass, and you wonder why they're all out at Crocker Park or Pinecrest or South Park, and not going to school. They should at least color code the passes so that the bus drivers know not to take them anywhere that's not in a Cleveland school area. Why would they take a Cleveland schools student to South Park or to Crocker Park? But yet they do. And these kids, answer me the question, what do you think we graduate 39% of our 9th graders?
Because we need licensed social workers in all of the schools.
And
licensed social workers.
They get enough money. Cleveland Public Schools get so much money more compared to the other districts around us. So much more, and so they certainly could hire, if that's going to solve it. But how are you going to get the kids to come to school? Because I was told you can't teach that empty chair. If they're not coming to school, you can't help them. The teachers can't help them. The counselors can't help them. They're not there to be helped. That one day I can go anywhere I want to go with bus pass is criminal. They just got fined $117 million because they weren't taking enough kids to school. I just read that in the paper. That gives you an idea how much money they're getting.
This is a printing issue. Yeah.
It's
a printing solution.
Somebody thinks that we're going to save money by giving them RTA. Now, the RTA people will come in this very room and said, these kids are causing so much trouble on the bus. The other people are afraid to ride the bus. To which I said, well, let's break that contract with Cleveland schools. Oh, no, we need the money. We need the revenue. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You're going to take the kids, you're going to take the problems. But they shouldn't put those kids on those buses. They should put in a yellow bus. Our responsibility is the state of Ohio. Pick the kid up in the neighborhood, take it back to his neighborhood. Not pick him up to where the bus lines go through. And then they have to navigate 2 blocks through alleys or neighborhoods to get home. Where especially that when they finally put 6th, 7th, and 8th graders now get bus passes.
Senator Patton,
because of the noise I made.
If we really want to get to a single solution, I would love to get back to what you and my mother grew up with. My mom went to Orchard School and she walked to elementary school and she went home for lunch and then she went back. And it was truly a neighborhood school. She rode with her trombone to the football games on the bus and no one bothered her at all, right? So equitable funding for schools across the state of Ohio has not been the policy. It has not been the policy.
Well, I think that the fair school funding plan that we passed two general assemblies ago, and my hope is that we will fulfill the third and final tranche of that funding.
Well, I think that there's no perfect solution.
Go back to the $10.5 billion
that the school districts are holding in their bank accounts.
The Angel Scholarship Fund, I think, was a tremendous win. As much as I am a fan of equitable funding, I really do love that choice. I was able to fund my alma mater in a way financially I would not have been able to. So I think that it is a wonderful way to give Ohioans some choice on education. But having safe, walkable communities is certainly going to solve a lot of the problems of
And how do you do
school
that when you have
attendance.
300 fewer police officers than you're budgeted for? See, everything goes hand in hand eventually. You know, they had lunch with Mayor Bibb, and he said, I'm budgeted for 1,400 policemen, and I said, you have 1,154. You know, and he says, well, I'm budgeted for 40. I said, well, then hire them. But you can't hire them. The one class had 11 people in it. 11. When my brother Timmy took the test, and he's older than I am now, but years ago when he took test, 1968, 69, 1,500 people showed up at Public Auditorium and took the test. They hired 75 for the first class, another 75%, but 150 officers were hired from that one test at one time. And now you have 40 people apply. Even the suburbs aren't getting applications for it because of the criticism that they're brought to bear. And the media and the public are always attacking the police. What about the good stuff that they do?
I interviewed for a position with the city and I didn't get it, and I thought, oh good, I'll have my life. Like, anyone who thinks that there are real government conspiracies has never worked for the government, because there are no perfect solutions to any problem. There's just those of us who show up and say, this is where my home, and I have all of my skills and all of my talents and all of my passions because of people from my home, from Northeast Ohio. So yes, the work is tiring, but I'm going to show up and do it every single day. So where do you draw your wellspring of hope to keep showing up despite the many challenges and the tapestries of problems? How do you do it?
Well, the easiest thing is to give up.
Yeah.
The easiest thing is to give up. And what drives me is, you know, being the strong family guy I like to think I am. You know, I have those 5 daughters and I have those 10 grandkids. And you try desperately to make sure that at least Ohio is all I can kind of control what one voice that I might have. You know, I'll try to do to kind of help make it safer, better, faster, work more efficiently, more effectively. You want everybody to be able to have a job, stay in Ohio if they want to, because, you know, I'm blessed that the 4 daughters that have children all still live in Ohio. I have one daughter who lives in Chicago, but she doesn't have children. But so at least I'm close to all my grandkids. My sister Winnie has 4 grandkids, but 3 live in Cincinnati.
Your Facebook feed is like a dopamine rush. You are.
The most shameless
It's so clear where your treasures are. Yeah.
The most shameless. But one of the things I always try to do, and I even do it, you have to order my Senate cards, is I always put my cell phone on my business cards. Because I always tell the people in the community, if you don't have my cell phone, you're not trying hard enough. Someone asks me a question on Facebook, government question. I very politely say, I don't conduct government business on Facebook, but here is my cell phone. Call me right away. Who's ever on that feed will then see my Facebook. I'm putting my number out there for the world. I want people to call me. I want people to call when they disagree with me. I'll explain my position on
Truly.
it, and they'll still be mad and they'll still yell. But I said, okay. I said, I heard you. I'm going back based on what I believe in my heart. The voters that now, 23 years later, have continued to put me there in a county that doesn't elect Republicans.
Absolutely.
You know, yet I'm still able to get.
Because you're our neighbor. You have a reputation that precedes you of really genuine, honest, hardworking, patient. You will listen to anyone, including people who disagree with you. And you're here to create a better place for our grandchildren to grow up in. And I really appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. All right, catch us.
You could tell.
You
could
too.
You could tell. I got like 5 calls where on the phone.
Yeah.
I gotta